The Solid Waste Authority of the City of Crescent City and the County of Del Norte, State of California, is now meeting in regular session. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at the assigned time. All items will be taken out of sequence to accommodate public and staff availability. I would ask, as we call the meeting in order, Pledge of Allegiance. Bill, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today? Would you lead us in the pledge? I thought we'd have that little bit different variety and recognize that. So,
ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And we're going to start and take an item out of sequence, which I was very tempted to pull off, item number 5.1. And this is the discussion and possible action regarding allocation of up to 4 authority-directed bin pools to support the cleanup of the former Surfside Bar and Grill on Front Street. And Commissioner Holly, I'm going to turn this over to you for an explanation on the, we won't pull it off, we will quickly discuss it, and please give us a little history there.
Okay, thank you, Chair Gitlin. This is a matter that when we did the pre-agenda review, it seemed like a good thing to put on the agenda, actually. Mr. Gitlin brought it up and thought that this would, we know that that particular building on Front Street has had a complex past and a difficult current life and an even more complex future. So in acknowledging that, thinking about it after we put this on the agenda, I did have an opportunity to talk to our city manager and our city attorney, and it appears to be a little premature to bring this forward right now. We will know more probably about that property in the next 1 or 2 months, and perhaps then we'll bring it back, but my suggestion is that we not address it at all tonight.
Okay, that will be fine. I'm going to defer to any other of our members if they wish to discuss it. And having said that, I'm going to move right into public comments, which it is for slightly after 4 o'clock. We're going to open it up. Any member of the public may address the Solid Waste Management Authority on any matter, including the one we just discussed. After receiving recognition from the chair, please give your name and address for the record, and comments will be limited to 3 minutes. And before we do that, I just want to make a quick reference that we are 1 member short. Commissioner Sullivan is now retired supervisor, so until we have a 5th member of this board, we're going to be 4, and I anticipate that will be filled shortly by the Board of Supervisors. So having said that, we'll now move into public comments, and please come up, identify yourself, sir, and welcome to our solid waste meeting.
I'm Dale Watson, 1205 Dundas Street, Reading, Crescent City. Last month you were worried about the cost of laboratory charges, and they are pretty heavy. And you were talking about going to checking with different laboratories. I might point out that if you can get those sampling requirements reduced a little bit, you can save a lot more money than by changing laboratories. And to do the job of solid waste management responsibly and economically, a lot of those samples don't help you very much. In fact, the main use of those samples in my experience, has been to impose additional requirements, and if you can't meet them, to fine you. So I would suggest that you not just quietly take those samples. Ted pointed out a couple of months ago that they're going to get worse. The stormwater runoff sampling is going to get worse, and those charges are going to rise even more. In my experience, those samples have been used in other cases against the people that provide them. Most public agencies use their own money to collect evidence against somebody they want to go against, but the Water Quality Control Board makes people take samples and then uses them to require them to take more samples or to provide treatment for their action.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Do we have any additional speakers who wish to address? No additional speakers? Okay, then we'll close the public comments. Mr. Ward, is there anything with regard to Dale's comments that you could update in your director's report, or is you care to address his issue right now?
Not directly. I'll bring that up when I do the presentation on the water quality monitoring.
So this will be Mr. Dale's comments will be incorporated in that
I'll
response.
try to address them.
Okay, we'll now move on to consent agenda. I'm going to recuse myself from item number 1.1, which involves approval of minutes, and I will be an abstain on that since I was not at the last meeting, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. We'll do two separate votes on this, one with and one without 1.1 in there.
We don't actually have 3 people to approve. Commissioner Gastineau wasn't here either.
Okay, our council, what's our protocol on this? Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Commissioner Wilson, that we're now 2, so what's our protocol on this?
Did anybody watch the video?
No, I can honestly say I did not, and I didn't watch the whole thing, so I can't sit here and tell you I did, so.
It was a well-run meeting.
I saw a picture of you on there, and you looked like you were doing a fine job, Commissioner Holly, but is this something that we'll just have to defer until the next meeting?
It
Acceptance
sounds
of
like it. We will
1.1?
need,
Commissioner Sullivan wouldn't be able to anyway, because he wouldn't be here.
it is on the web, and so if you'd like to briefly review that meeting and see if you think that the minutes accurately reflect what occurred, then you can vote on it at our next meeting. But without a city and a county vote, and Chair Gitlin being the only county vote right now, the minutes can't be approved.
All right, so what I will promise to do between now and then the next immediate time I can get on the video is I will look at the video. Now, I will have to do this in a public meeting format, is that correct? Which will be the next meeting. This is the approval of the minutes only. We're excluding, everything else is on the consent agenda. We haven't taken a motion on it, but on 1.1. And then we'll have to bring 1.1 up at the next meeting in February, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I also have a question regarding that. I had some changes that I wanted to put forward in the minutes, and I made copies for everybody. So at this point in time, since I don't know if I should read them or pass them out so they can, when they're reviewing the video, can verify these comments, or
Will you be here I assume you'll be here at the next meeting. Could you bring them back?
what is the date on?
It'll be February.
May I suggest that perhaps we take your notes and then we modify the draft minutes considering that, and then we bring the draft minutes revised per those comments after Mr. Gitlin has had a chance to review them, and then we'll bring that to the next meeting. Does that work?
I'd appreciate that. And so should I just pass
We
it?
can do it that way.
Okay.
All right, so what we'll do now is, with the exception of 1.1, which has been pulled until the, what is that, the February 10th meeting, Ted?
Believe so.
February, okay, to the next meeting, whereupon I will have admitted to...
February 14th.
February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, okay, even better.
Love you
Can't think
guys.
of anything more romantic than reading the minutes of our previous meeting on Valentine's Day prior to that. So having said that, I'll have that read, and it is not imperative that Commissioner Gastineau read it, because we have a sitting city commissioner. You're just short of one county vote. Is that what I'm hearing correctly, council? That we need one
That's
county
correct.
vote?
We'll need
Total of
and
3 votes, but one
total.
has to be county, one has to be city.
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll have that done. Okay, I'll entertain a motion for consent agenda items 1.2, 1.3 at this time.
I'll move, but I have some comments.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second to that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Having said that, let's go back to you, Mr. Commissioner Holly, and ask your questions on which one.
Thank you. Just a technical question in regards to the the letter from Spencer Fine of Cal Recycle. I think that's where we talk about multifamily complexes meeting thresholds. When I looked at the number 3, and it talked about the percentage of multifamily complexes that are in compliance, I was a little surprised at how many were not in compliance with this, given that apparently recycling collection services are provided to multifamily collection customers for no additional charge. I mean, usually people take advantage of something that's free. Am I reading this right?
You are, though it's important to realize that these are, the records that we have here in this report are strictly Recology Del Norte customers. So there are other complexes such as Seawood that does their own collection, and then they bring the materials as self-haulers to the transfer stations. And I believe Seawood, for example, also offers recycling collections. That's an opportunity that's available to all multifamily complexes, and so some choose to move their own recyclables, either because they like the nickels for the bottles and the cans, or that they choose to do so. So it's possible to have a recycling program, even though it's free from Recology, without signing up for it.
Do something different. Okay,
Yeah.
that helps. Thank you.
Any additional comment from our board? Any additional comments from the public on the
I'd
consent
like to
agenda?
point out something on the
Yes.
budget revision, which is, this is essentially new money to the budget.
This is the $32,764 question.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what you're.
That's correct. What I mean by it's new money is that our income from the transfer station is significantly exceeding the budgeted amount. So in the first 6 months, we had over $20,000 in excess revenues compared to the budget. And so that allows us to reallocate those revenues to the budget lines, and that's what that's what this budget transfer does.
Okay, that's always good news when you're talking about black ink now.
Black ink, yes.
Okay, because I got admonished recently, we were dipping below, and we had a little red there for a while, which is understandable with all of the things that we've been involved with in the year 2014. Okay, so Karen, let's take a vote, and we'll move on with the exception of 1.1, which will be re-agendized in the next February meeting. Consent agenda is 1.2, 1.3.
Commissioner Gastineau?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes?
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
And Chairman Gitlin?
Yes. Okay, so we'll move on to landfill exposure 2.1 review and file semi-annual monitoring and report submitted to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board regarding the Crescent City landfill for the period July through December 2014. I think, Dale, this will answer some of your questions, and you brought it before. And Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying. Okay. I have several PowerPoints, and unfortunately, since I was not able to complete the written form of this report, I thought I would give you a summary on a PowerPoint, or that was my concept. Oh, okay, I can see it over there. I'll work with that. Okay, okay. So this is the Crescent City Landfill Semi-Annual Report. This is due January 15th and July 15th of each year. It summarizes and analyzes monitoring data that was collected during the last 6 months and puts that in context of the historical record. And this round, it includes constituent of concern monitoring, which is a much more comprehensive suite of monitoring that's done every 5 years. And this is the second report to include data on the new wells, E4 shallow and E4 deep, and they're drilled in this area here, as we've discussed in previous meetings. So what are the new wells telling us? So this is a close-up of that area. So looking back, so looking in this area, this is where the wells were drilled. This is a water body that's on the subsequent maps. So here's that pond. And this is the shallow wells, and these lines indicate the underwater, the topography of the groundwater level with respect to mean sea level. And so it's going downhill. So if you imagine lines that are going perpendicular to these lines, that's the direction of water flow. And so what this tells us is that in this area, water is flowing this direction, and in this area, water is flowing this direction. It's very interesting with respect to comparing to the deep well, because looking at the deep wells, what it's telling us is in this area, water is flowing this direction, and in this area, water is flowing this direction. So you're seeing a big difference between what's happening in the shallow and the deep water bearing zones under the landfill with respect to this region. So it's,
Can you stop for a second
Yes.
there? Okay, so basically what I got is when you showed the one on the left,
Yes.
you motioned as if the water were flowing towards the right. And then when you showed the deep well, you also motioned with your cursor there that it was also going towards the right. So I'm confused by your arrow going back and forth.
Right, okay,
Which
so
way the water is
in-
going, because
in
I
this
see
one,
that part
it's-
there
it's
is
going
very
this way.
confusing.
In this one, it's
to-
going this way. You see how it's going much more directly to, in this direction, and in this way, it's going more to the south?
So if you were to turn the little arrow around, the head of the arrow would be going down, is that?
No, they're perpendicular to the line, so if the line's straight this way, the water flows that way. Like that, the water flows this direction. So these ones here, water flows that way, and this one, water
Am I looking at,
here, it flows that direction. Here it's flowing that direction.
maybe too, you can give me some clarification of this.
Uh-huh.
Am I looking at this as though there were steps?
Yes, it's like a topographical map
Okay.
that one uses when you're hiking.
So the steps, obviously.
So these steps are going down,
All right.
these steps are going down, and you can see that the direction of these steps is more in the southerly direction, and the direction of these steps is more in an easterly direction. Okay? But it's significant in that this is one of the few areas under the landfill where it appears, based on the data we're collecting, that the shallow and the deep water contours are moving in different directions. You may recall that the groundwater beneath the landfill is kind of like an imperfect layer cake, in which you have, you can think of the water-bearing zones as the two layers of the cake, and there's a little marsh deposit that separates them that's kind of like the frosting between. And so these water-bearing zones can be flowing in different directions depending upon what's happening and depending upon the data that we collect. So this is, like I said, one of the few instances that we found the shallow and the deep water contours actually moving in different directions. So it's a little unclear as to how the Regional Water Quality Control Board will take this news. but
Was it
this
done
is
at
what the-
different times of the day? Because I know I've done water pulling, which makes a huge difference if the tide is coming in or out. So like the time of the day,
That's a very good question. And generally, we collect this data all at the same time. So it's all collected within
an hour?
Yeah, within an hour or so, all of these points of data were collected around the same time.
So that would be the only thing I could really think of, if maybe the, tide peaked or something.
Yeah, there are a number of other considerations that might have an influence on this, but it's, that will become more clear as we collect more data. At this point, we just have 2 data points, meaning 2 seasons where we've collected this data. So
And
this
did
is what we've done.
last year too?
Like I said, we have 2 seasons of data, so we had essentially spring and summer so far on the E4 pair. We have much more comprehensive data on the other wells at the landfill, but for these new wells, we just have 2. So moving on. So looking at the water quality analysis, here we're looking at bicarbonate alkalinity. And there's a term used, the tolerance interval. That's essentially when we did an engineering analysis of the landfill water quality monitoring before, there was enough data to determine when the landfill was actually impacting groundwater, and that was determined to be when you're above that upper tolerance level. So for the shallow wells, if our bicarbonate alkalinity comes in at above 270 milligrams per liter, then we know that our shallow wells are having an impact on the water around the landfill. And at this point, the monitoring data that is over that point is mostly in the deep wells, and we don't have a tolerance interval for that. What is bicarbonate alkalinity? It's like taking a little bit of baking soda and mixing it in your water. That's what it is. So, however, what we are finding is that, unfortunately, the E4 shallow well, the well we just drilled, is above that level. So it appears that this data supports the conclusion that the landfill is impacting the shallow groundwater.
But,
Yes?
okay, so E4, I don't see it
E4 is
that
not on
sheet.
this, it's not graphed, because we only have 2 data points.
Okay, so yeah, I don't see that on the key.
It's not graphed.
And then again, now, if I were to repeat this to you,
Uh-huh.
this is upper for deep wells, so this is the deep wells, all of these, only,
The ones that are above the tolerance on the graph are the deep wells, but E4 shallow is above the tolerance also.
above the tolerance.
Yeah. Looking at another analyte that we look at is total dissolved solids. So again, there's no upper tolerance for the deep wells, and for the shallow wells, the upper tolerance is 690. And thankfully, well, E4 shallow is below that level. But what this is showing us is that at this point, it does not look like any of the wells are impacting shallow groundwater for total dissolved solids.
And which ones were the new ones, or is it the deep ones, or the shallow ones that are
The new ones are the E4 pair.
Shallow.
Like I said, they're not graphed here because we only have the 2 data points. So looking at surface water, these are the ponds that are on site. We have 3 locations where we monitor surface water. And so I'll look at 2 analytes here, calcium and sodium. Here's calcium, and you can see that our upper tolerance is 21 milligrams per liter, which is about here. So you can see that in summer of 2014, both S2 and S3 were above our tolerance limits on calcium.
Well, what about, again, this is so close to the ocean, I imagine there'd be old seashells and, things that would have a higher calcium. I mean, we might always be high in calcium in that area.
Well, this is the historical data before you. You can see that in general, S2 does tend to be high compared to those limits.
But you know what I mean? We might naturally be high in that. You think? Calcium? Just because I know from, seashells, they just are so high. I put them in my water to help neutralize.
Right. Well, obviously, we don't add calcium
Has to be in the sand.
actively, but there is no bottom liner to the landfill, so it's always possible that the landfill is the source of this. Looking at sodium.
Ted?
Yes?
I'm sorry. What, the one just before there regarding calcium, in 2003, the S1
Right.
well just spiked. What causes
It
something
did.
like that? Because it dropped way down the following year.
That's a good question. I'd have to look back at the reports and see what I noted at that time. It's not immediately present in my mind. Thanks for highlighting that.
It just jumps out.
There are others that jump out even further, but usually not in surface water. Surface water tends to be pretty
They
much the
probably
same.
toss those ones that are way out of the norm, huh?
I don't know. Data is data. So we report the data unless we can explain why that data shouldn't be included, it gets included.
Yeah.
Sodium, I think Commissioner Wilson's idea that there may be some influence from the ocean, this graph actually supports that idea better because, of course, salt spray, sodium chloride. So when that salt spray dissolves into the surface ponds, then that elevates the level of sodium and chloride in those ponds. And so you'll see that in this case, S1 and S2, that is the ponds that are closer to the ocean, actually have generally elevated levels of sodium compared to S3. And the upper tolerance limit is 15.4, which is about here, so you can see that S1 and S2 still get above that in the summer.
Yeah, we may never change on those, you know what I mean?
Well, that's, we are not
This thing
under
open
enforcement
forever?
action from this, but part of the reason why I present this is that this data is part of the way that the Regional Water Quality Control Board concludes that the landfill is actually impacting the surrounding groundwater. None of these impacts are above drinking water standards, and there's nothing that it's immediately hazardous, but in terms of what is the science telling us, is this landfill impacting groundwater? The answer is yes.
Well, it looks like it's also going in a downward trend, too. So-
Well, in that regard it is. In other things, for instance, looking at total dissolved solids, you can see that the E2 deep is sort of on the gradual climb. Similarly, well 2 deep is on a gradual climb. So it's not always, the trends are not always diminishing, unfortunately. Okay, so that's a summary of the semi-annual report to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Regarding the comments from Mr. Watson about the monitoring requirements, I have to generally concur, and this is an area that's of concern to me, both with regards to the E4 pair, meaning those new wells that we put in, and with regards to stormwater monitoring. Stormwater monitoring is not something that's summarized in the semi-annual report. There's a separate reporting process for that. But once you start collecting data, then you start getting monitored on that data. You start getting fined and enforced on that data. So generally, we want to make sure that we're monitoring this to be responsible. But if we can collect less data, I think that generally works better for the community. So,
So Ted?
yes?
If we start going over the minimums, the tolerances on this, how do we combat that?
It's a really good question, and unfortunately, I don't think that there's a very straightforward answer because it's an unlined landfill. The options that Gina Morrison has mentioned include clean closure, which for professionals in the field, those are frightening words because that would mean picking up the landfill and moving it somewhere else. An incredibly expensive proposition that I would not recommend we pursue in any way, shape, or form. That said, the other options to try to reduce these impacts, there aren't very many options that are available. Part of the monitoring requirements that we've been required to do include gas monitoring. And so we monitor gas around the landfill perimeter here. But that really only addresses volatile organics, the kinds of things that can dissolve into groundwater that off-gassing might help. But it won't address sodium or bicarbonate alkalinity or stuff like that.
There is one, again, Commissioner Gastineau was not here last meeting, and so what's happening, and Mr. Watson had brought up, where'd he go there, is that in July of this coming year, the collection, they're going to want more collections for storm water reports. And however, a lot of the tests that are done for stormwater report look for things that typically maybe in a parking lot that would run off. And so it just doesn't make any sense that we would be having to do stormwater reports on a landfill where there's no vehicle traffic to go over. And so one of the things that we discussed last time was to keep this a very high priority because if they can, just use their common sense and eliminate that requirement for an area that doesn't have any traffic on it, then we could ask them to, not only would we not be subject to the additional requirements that they're going to be putting on, but just to completely I guess, not do any storm water testing at the landfill. Continue it at the transfer station where there's a parking lot and asphalt and oil from vehicles, and when the storms, it goes into storm drains and stuff, but not out there. So that was a really important thing that we discussed at our last meeting, to try and get that resolved prior in this next few months.
All right, Board, are there any additional questions you have on the review of the monitoring of these the wells? And having seen no additional comments, I'll open it up to the public. Dale, were your questions sufficiently answered, or would you care to readdress? Come on up first, or we'll get you re-identified again. Remember, you're on
I'm
television.
Dale Watson, 1205 Dundas, Crescent City. The Water Quality Control Board has this philosophy that we don't have to hurt anybody or cause any problems. We don't have to worry about it. Their mission is to protect the groundwater and not wildlife or people or fish or anything else. I've had this discussion with members of them asking, now what problem have we created with some contamination in the groundwater if nobody drinks it or nobody uses it, or we don't have any any evidence of any wildlife contamination, and the answer was, our mission is to protect the water irregardless. So this is the kind of people you're dealing with, and there are people, maybe not many in Del Norte County, but in other parts of the state, that drink water a lot worse than what you're looking at here.
I think my response to that would be, Dale, is if this brings a clear and present danger. If the levels of the sodium, or whatever you call it, bicarbonate, or these dissolved materials are bringing, the arrow's heading in the wrong direction, and that water quality is getting worse and it's being consumed, I think that's a red flag. If that's happening, I would expect that we should know about that, but I don't hear that in your report.
Well, I have to say that I generally concur with what Mr. Watson said, but in terms of my knowledge about the impacts of these low level of impacts, there are no adverse health impacts that I'm aware of for these levels of detection. That doesn't mean that it won't be of a concern to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and it's my responsibility to make sure you're all aware.
Thank you very much. Any additional public comments? Hearing and seeing none, then I'll move it back to the board. I'll entertain a motion, and I guess, Mr. Ward, you're asking us to file this report.
No, well, the report's not ready. It will be submitted. It's due tomorrow.
So what action is necessary
I'm really
this
hoping
time?
that there isn't any specific action,
Okay.
because it's mostly informing you about the contents of this report.
All right, so at our next meeting, I'm going to presume you're going to have this agendized for us to...
I will put
file
that
it.
on the consent agenda, and then if there's any need to discuss it, we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to 3.1, Collections Franchise, discussion, possible action regarding new bin crank system developed by Recology Del Norte for use at the Klamath and Gasky transfer stations. Ted?
This is sort of like current events with solid waste. So, as you may recall, we had an issue with the previous cranking system. Generally, the issues included that the handle was fixed to the side of the bin. So trespassers would come in and they'd open up the bin, and then they'd illegally and improperly put materials into the bin, and then they'd leave and wouldn't have the courtesy to close the bin behind them. And so then animals will get in there, and it becomes an inspection issue. Other issues include that the cable and the gearing is exposed, and so that's always a possibility that something could get caught in there during the cranking process. And then some of these will move very quickly, and this almost moves as quickly as a fan, again, potentially a hazard. And then finally, you need a chain to secure the bin lid in place once it is cranked up. The replacement to this that we're looking at, and thanks to Jeremy Herber for working to develop this, but here's a picture. You can see this new cranking system. In this case, some of the advantages are this is much more secure. Once you crank it in place, it's really not moving, so it's quite a bit safer. This crank is removable, so both the drivers and our staff will have the removable crank. Once you seal this down, it really does lock that lid down, so it is much more secure once it is closed. And it's much less prone to vandalism, because once this handle is removed, it's unlikely that the vandals will bring the right tools with them to be able to open up the handle. The main issue we're facing right now is cranking time. There's a relationship between how heavy the lid is and the gearing ratio and how much effort you have to put into cranking. And so there is a limit on how hard you are able to crank, because past that point, now you're making it so difficult that we used to have a wonderful woman who was 80 years old and actually worked at the Gasky transfer station before she retired. I'd like to be able to still hire folks like that. And so I need to have a crank that an 80-year-old woman can actually crank. So what we're looking at is that this crank time is way too slow, meaning that it's taking somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes just to open the lid to one bin, which is a really long time to be cranking. And so what we're looking at is getting an inverter and a drill to help crank this, but we're still in the trial and error process, and hopefully with the inverter and drill, then the system will work, and then we'll have this installed on all of the other bins servicing Gasky and Klamath. But just wanted to inform you about how we're working with Recology and trying to solve this problem.
Okay, commissioners, any comments? Mr. Sparrow, would you care to address this issue at this time? The mic's open to you. Find
Okay.
out, okay, and I'll also open it up to the rest of the public for any comments. I was particularly interested about an 80-year-old person doing this, and I'm trying to say that's probably a good form of exercise for anybody younger than 80, but,
So-
go ahead.
What's the time frame to crank up production?
That's good.
Like that one.
Very, very well done. I like that.
My intent is to get an inverter and a drill in the coming week, and then see how well that works. Again, it's all in play, because we've certainly considered cordless drills, which have advantages and disadvantages. We've considered a portable generator and a corded drill, has advantages and disadvantages, and an inverter. But I think at this point, we're leaning towards an inverter and a drill.
So what's our possible action on this?
At this point, I'm just keeping you informed.
Okay.
So this is just part of what we do, but thought you all should know.
Okay, so
Can I ask one more thing? How many bins are we talking about? Are we talking about like 4 or 6? 10 bins?
And there are actively at least 2 and often 3 bins at each of the container sites.
Okay. Good.
Okay?
all right, public discussion is closed on this also. We'll move back to the transfer station, 4.1. Presentation regarding paint care producer responsibility program supporting paint collection and recycling.
Yep, this is
ahead,
how do I do a full screen? Slideshow, there we are, from beginning. Okay, so this is a presentation I was asked to prepare for a webinar that Cal Recycle put on statewide, reviewing this paint care program. And since I had already gone to the effort of presenting this, I thought I would inform the board as well as how our paint care program is working. So an overview of our paint recovery since the transfer station opened in March 2005. So before we had paint care, the transfer station operations contractor, Hambro WSG, was required to accept the most common household hazardous waste, which included non-aerosol latex paint, for no charge every day. So the Solid Waste Authority did not take possession of any of those materials, and we only accepted water-based latex. And so that was mixed with animal bedding and dried in little kiddie pools. And once that was totally dry, then it was regular solid waste and it was disposed of in the landfill. Some paint was made available for reuse in the reuse shed, which was purchased under a household hazardous waste grant. And we only accepted enamels, stains, and thinners during our one-day household hazardous waste event. So getting to paint care, the Solid Waste Authority was a founding member of the California Product Stewardship Council in 2008, and that entity made paints a priority target product for a product stewardship program. And so the AB 1343 was passed in 2010, and then that began a negotiating series of events with Paint Care. And Paint Care was, as the product stewardship organization, really the only game in town, and each local jurisdiction was trying to bargain with them about what were the provisions of their collection contracts. And so just in our case, it took from 2010 until 2013 to actually get agreements in place. Hambro WSG and Clean Harbors contract with Paint Care, and the first advertisements went out. The first advertisements were instructive in that they were half-page ads in the triplicate telling people, you're having to pay extra for your paint and you can recycle the paint. Call this number and we'll tell you where. You called the number and they said, is Reading close to you? So we gave them a little feedback saying that really was not very helpful because Reading's not very close and there's no use in advertising to tell anybody to go to Reading. So we did have, from that point, better relationships with Paint Care. They came and visited, and they, this is what our program looks like now. So this is our drop-off area for paints. Usually an attendant from Hambro WSG will come over to review the paints and make sure they're acceptable. So that includes all latex, acrylic, enamel, and oil-based paints, deck coatings, floor paints, primers, sealers, undercoat materials, stains, shellacs, lacquers, varnishes, urethanes, waterproofing sealers, metal coatings and rust preventatives, and swimming pool paints. And then there's also a list of non-acceptable products. And probably the biggest ones on that list are aerosol containers that still have product in them, and thinners, which often people have in their paint sheds. And so people empty out their paint sheds and bring those materials to us. We'll have those and be a little frustrated because we can only take those during our household hazardous waste collection event. So the startup costs were shared. Paint Care paid for ads in the local paper and on radio when we did get our local program going. And they agreed to cover the fencing cost to increase the storage capacity. So overall, we have reduced program costs, and not all of those reduced costs are easily quantified. For instance, Hambro WSG no longer has to purchase animal bedding or have labor to dry the latex paint. Their cost to receive and stack paint containers into labeled shipping containers isn't exactly covered. The cost to stock and track paint reuse is also only marginally covered. And Paint Care also covers the Clean Harbors disposal cost for paint materials from our household hazardous waste event. So for example, our cost for handling paint materials in 2012 was $3,870 just for that one-day event, and we've had no cost for managing paint since, because it's paid for when people buy new paint.
And how does that get distributed, and how much is it per gallon?
How much is collected per gallon? That's a good question. I didn't.
So
bring
I
that
just
up.
kind of, I want to follow up with Commissioner Wilson's question. If I'm going to the Home Depot and I'm
Yes.
going to buy a gallon of paint,
Yes.
it's going to be, I'm going to use $30 as an example. How much of that is the recycle fee? Or, I mean, can you approximate it?
I try not to guess. I'm sorry, I don't have that information in front of me.
Mr. Wallen, perhaps, or Mr. White, is there?
Per gallon?
It's 75, so it's a modest fee, but it's less than, well, less than 1% then, if that's the case. Okay. But that's-
It's
yeah.
not a lot, but I don't recall the exact amount.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we've had a dramatic increase in the convenience of paint recycling here in Del Norte because of this program. Our oil-based paints are now accepted daily at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. And in 2012, 56% of the paint collected was collected daily rather than at the household hazardous waste event. And in 2013, 88% of our paint was collected daily. So most of it's now being collected daily. This program was also to establish retail take-back locations, and we still don't have a retail take-back location. The Del Norte County Transfer Station is the only place to bring paint at this time, though paint is sold in 5 stores county-wide. So in 2012, we recovered about 16,600 pounds of paint, and in 2014, it went up by nearly 50%, and we collected 26,300 pounds. So it's gone up a lot.
Mr. Ward, help me out on the logistics. I'm trying to get a picture of this, this fee that is prepaid. So when we have a free paint day, which is, we do once a year at this point?
It's a household hazardous waste collection event.
In September, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken?
that's correct, September,
Okay.
October.
Now, they bring in the paint, which is an empty paint can, or even a half-filled paint can. Now, that's taken in, it's free, even though it's been prepaid. How are we reimbursed? It's a process that goes to the state?
We actually don't see that cost because we've set it up so that Paint Care has a direct contract with Clean Harbors. Clean Harbors is our contractor to manage the hazardous waste, and we've set it up so that Paint Care's cost for managing that paint is paid by Paint Care. We don't see that bill.
All right, so Sacramento is getting this fee.
No.
No?
The
Where
Paint
does-
Care-
where does the 75 cents a can go?
It goes to Paint Care. Paint Care has been established by a consortium of paint manufacturers. So it's a way of making the paint manufacturers responsible for recovering excess used discarded paint.
All right, now, once it's in this Paint Care product, this consortium, I guess is what, do we not have a direct cost with collecting? You have deployment of staff, you have...
We have
How do
some
we recover those
costs.
costs?
We aren't getting.
We're not.
We're not getting compensated for the reduced
what's the
costs that we have, but
purpose?
we don't have as many costs as we once did.
All right, well, we do have costs, though.
But for instance, we're not paying directly for paint disposal. Paint Care is covering that cost.
I'm just wondering, and maybe this is the wrong time to ask this question. Someone is paying for something, the Solid Waste Authority is taking care of the matter at cost to us. Where does this money go? It goes to a consortium, and what do they do with their
Well,
money?
it goes to Paint Care, and then Paint Care there is an oversight by Cal Recycle over Paint Care and how this program is managed. And that's part of what this presentation was geared towards, is to help Cal Recycle understand better how this program is working statewide. Because of course there's many different communities, and for instance, while we were able to negotiate an agreement with Paint Care, there are many communities who are still negotiating.
The other communities, with all due respect, I'm not concerned with.
Okay.
I'm concerned with this community, and I'm concerned that there's costs to our bottom line for this one day, and I was actually going to suggest we do more than one day a year at some future meeting, but it's costing the Solid Waste Authority to do this. I'm wondering why we don't have recourse to get some of these funds back from this consortium that you just referred to.
A lot of the costs, for instance, of the household hazardous waste collection event are not just about paint. They involve pesticides, herbicides.
But I'm talking about paint.
I
I'm talking
understand.
about a fee that someone pays when they go to Home Depot or Crescent Ace Hardware, and they're expecting, it's the same thing when I buy a computer. I have a fee to pay, and then I can get rid of it, but there is ultimately a cost to this governance right here. I'm talking about paint, I'm not talking about anything else. And this consortium has collected these funds, and we have costs, and I'm wondering, and this board can wonder with me, do we have a right to get some of these costs back through this paint consortium you've just referred to? Or should we be even revisiting that? Is that a
It's
reasonable
still a good
conversation?
question. For instance, I think there is need for additional outreach and education. I think ideally, when you're buying paint, you should know where to bring that paint back when you're done. And that level of education is not yet out there. If we could provide that education, I agree. It's the kind of thing that Paint Care should pay for. But that's part of the partnership, is moving forward, trying to figure out what those costs are going to be and how they'll be paid.
Maybe next time when you do a webinar, it would be interesting to, follow the back end as far as the number of gallons sold. And I don't know that it will really benefit Del Norte County, but as far as, most paint, of course, is used up, and there aren't, there is a smaller percentage that actually gets turned in. And just for the amount of money, I know in the past, some of the particularly the government ran, they had a tendency that the legislature saw this pool of money sitting there, and they went and they grabbed it, and put it in the general fund, and it caused a lot of well, actually, the recycling industry paid heavily. There were several places that closed down because of that, and it sounds like this, though, is ran, each of the, hopefully, the people that are putting into this will monitor one another to make sure they're getting their fair share, I guess. It's just an interesting question, but I just don't know that we'll really know how many gallons we sell here in Del Norte County and how many actually get turned back in that have paint in them.
That was discussed in the webinar, and in general, Paint Care is accumulating more funds in reserve than they anticipated. There was more paint sales last year than they had projected, and so there was, as part of this conversation, a discussion about, okay, so those extra funds in reserve, are you going to help us with outreach, or are you going to expand your retail take-back? What's going to happen with those? It's not exactly clear yet, but they do have quite a bit of money in reserve.
All right,
Okay,
your
so
presentation actually brings up more questions that I'd like to revisit at a future meeting.
okay,
I just kind of have a need to express what a benefit this is to the users. They at least have a place to take their paint, and they're getting the benefit of that. I mean, if we're going to advertise, maybe we can advertise about how we're giving this service to the customer. The other thing, I wondered what it looked like. Do you have staff that are out here that watch the paint come in, or does the transfer station?
that's Hambro WSG. We'll log the paint in as they come in over the scale, and then they're directed to unload it in the cart that I had showed you earlier.
Okay,
there.
so looking to see if whether or not there's thinner, who does that? Does that happen?
That Hambro WSG does.
Okay, so somebody runs around and takes
Yes.
a look. Okay, thank you.
So Ted, just my comment. Before we got together with Paint Care, we were spending almost $4,000 a year.
Yep.
Now we are
a one-day event.
spending $0 a year to dispose of paint.
That's correct.
So that's the bottom line right there. We don't have that $4,000 expense now.
I
because
think
of
these
paint.
are all valid points. I'm pleased with it. I'd like to see the Paint Care program actually expanded to more than one day a year. I'm just wondering about the accounting.
Yeah.
When you pay for something. Okay.
It's every day.
88% is done daily.
So Paint Care is going to pay for that storage fence that's in the slide there. Gives us more storage space for those boxes once they get filled with paint. And then here's our reuse shed. You can see that that's next to the self-haul drop-off area, and while it is able to store hazardous materials safely, you can see that it's often used for non-hazardous materials.
And I would like to see if there is again, a surplus. For this community, the two-part epoxy paints are used on boats in a particularly, I know I use a lot of it, like the Golden Gate Bridge down there at Ocean World, and so I'm constantly painting, but as far as the disposal, and I know that all the fishermen, and so if there is a surplus, just because this particular community with our saltwater environment uses those, maybe in the future, if there's a surplus, that could maybe be added to the list. I think, like I said, and particularly the fishing industry would appreciate that.
Right, because absolutely, you're right. The two-part epoxy paints are one of the excluded products. So quickly going over the last couple slides. So paint reuse. CalRecycle was very interested in how paint reuse was being supported by Paint Care. They offered to pay 25 cents per container, which on the bottom line is not very much of an incentive. For instance, but though our paint reuse has expanded. In 2013, we had 0.08 tons of paint recycled, and at this point in 2014, we had about 8% was reused. They haven't sought reimbursement at all because, for instance, if every container in 2014 had 2 pounds of paint, and it's likely more, reimbursement for the whole year would be at about $155. So the incentive is really not very much to support reuse, though we still do it. So looking ahead, the Paint Care program absolutely reduces local costs and increases convenience. Point of sale education and outreach efforts need expansion. We need one or more retail take-back location for paints, ideally in every county, including this one. From a customer standpoint, thinners and aerosol should be included, perhaps two-part paints. No bulking, meaning that we don't mix the paints together to make one large container, means that there is more of an intensive need for storage space because you're storing partially empty containers. The Delaware County Transfer Station is improved by extending our storage area for paints at minimal expense. Paint Care staff has generally been helpful, and generally the contracting has been one of the most complicated issues with regards to this program. So that's the end of that presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Gitlin, I have one more quick question. Cool. Can you explain paint reuse? Is that something that the Paint Care takes and they take it somewhere else and it's reused? Or
No, it's local reuse.
I mean, if I want to paint a recreation room, I can go in and
Yes, you can.
pick up some paint?
Yes, you can.
As long as you don't care what color it is.
Well, yes,
Mix
yes.
it all together.
You haven't seen my
It
rec
is-
room.
It is a first come, first serve. You
Okay.
got to take what you got. But for especially folks who are looking at graffiti abatement or
Yep.
things where they need large volumes of paint, we'll
spoken
absolutely
about
work
this.
with you.
Is that how it's local? Okay, very
Yeah.
good. That's what
If
it
I'm
sounds
not mistaken, the paint of greatest quantity is this beige color. You've mentioned it before. I've heard it before, and, as we drive around our community, we see no shortage of graffiti. It seems to be a constant and a chronic problem in our area. Not all the areas are beige, and, they're hit, but it's a common color, so I think overall it sounds like it's a good program. Okay, any other board commissioner comments? Open up
No,
to
I'm happy it is. It seems like a real successful, good
public.
program.
Public,
Well-run.
any input on this program? Mr. Ward, that concludes your report of
That
this? So-
concludes that one.
So what we're doing, there's no, I'm sorry. Yes, Joel, come on up. Thank you.
Just because I called Joel Wallenhammer, WSG, I called my consultant, Google, and looked up Paint Care here. $0 for half pint smaller, 35 cents for half pint to a gallon, 75 cents for a gallon, and $1.60 for a gallon to 5 gallons. That's what we pay at Home Depot, wherever we buy our paint.
Okay.
Thanks, Joel.
Now, again, all these questions bring up other questions. I'm just wondering if our neighbor to the north, the Beaver State, Oregon, has a similar cost.
They actually have a similar program. Paint Care started in Oregon.
I mean, or is the paint incrementally less expensive up there, irrespective of sales tax. I mean, I'm just wondering that these costs have to, we need to be educated. The public needs to be educated on what this is all about. They're paying for something in front, and they can dispose of it. And I appreciate the fact, Commissioner, that you brought to my attention about the savings, $4,000. There is still a cost associated with what we're doing today. And we don't know, indirect or direct, employee involvement, there's some kind of a cost, and it does take away from our bottom line. That's a question I'd like to get some clarification on
Okay.
in the future. Okay, so we'll move on. There's no action to be taken on this at this point?
That's correct.
Okay, move on to 4.2, status report on wall repair at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. I understand a little dent in the fender there?
Yep, this is the update on the wall that was, a vehicle ran into it and knocked the wall panel down, and so that happened just before the last meeting, and I had showed you this picture. Since that time, we've received estimates, and Tim Haben has been contracted to complete the repair. The estimated cost is $7,764, and we've already received the check from State Farm. So
Okay.
as soon as the project's completed, we'll pay Mr. Haben straight away. And there you can see the new wall panel has been poured in place. You may notice there are heavy-duty grommets that are in the top because it's going to be placed into the grooves of those columns using a crane. So full payment's already been received. The budget transfer that you've already approved includes income and payment for this wall repair, and the crane is scheduled for the 20th of January. We expect the repair to be done by the end of the month.
Excellent.
Did they tie in any rebar in there?
There is rebar in the wall, yes.
Commissioners, any additional comments on the wall?
No, that's great.
Okay. Then we'll move on. 5.1 has been discussed, and we'll revisit that at a later time per Commissioner Hawley. Number 5.2, discussion possible action regarding fiscal year 13-14 audit of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority by Smith and Newell and corrective action plan.
The action that we're looking for today is approval to submit the corrective action plan that's included in your agenda. I'd be happy to go over any of the detailed items. It's similar to last year. I can give you some of the highlights if you'd like. I just took quite a bit of time in the last presentation, so I'll look to guidance as to whether or not you would like me to explain.
Commissioners?
There were a couple things that I thought might be addressed to make this a little bit clearer. I appreciated your report. I felt that you addressed the issues that are specific to Solid Waste Authority, where I know Smith and Newell is looking at this from a operating as if it were a regular business without this liability of this landfill hanging over our head. And so your reply to this on page 2, I thought was addressed it nicely. The thing that I found missing on the last paragraph was, again, it said, compared to the prior fiscal year, authority's net position worsened by just over 18,000. And then you put in some of the factors. The one, though, that in my going over this with the county auditor, we did not receive any of the money for the grants that we had budgeted in. And so the bottle grant, and so that affected our bottom line. So I wanted to have that included in there.
That's actually more impacts this fiscal year than the fiscal year that was being audited.
I looked at the figures from the end of June 30th, 2014. We're a little bit in the dark here. As a board, we have not really received any figures to go over for the end of the year that Smith and Newell is looking at. So that's one comment I would have in regards to this. Generally, I've had to go back and get something directly from the county. So we really don't have that to take a look at, but when I did speak with the auditor, I looked at some of the different expenses, and that was one that he brought up, was that we had budgeted to receive money for those grants and that we did not as of June 30th. So those are the numbers I got from him, but I haven't been given any numbers, so I don't know what to tell you. That's what, so that kind of puts us at a loss, so I'd like to make that point. And, let's see, the other one, there was a couple things I wanted to mention in regards to page 3. And what is it, the GASB 68 being a significant deficiency. And I'm a little bit torn on that one, as I was last year. I know that we're kind of following the, the plan that the county has and what their percentage is on their, that they pay out for their unfunded liabilities. And again, last year, this body, we had it was $55,000 that, for the pension plan, but we only put in 11,000. And so again, I'd just kind of like to see that mentioned, we're following the county standard, but we just don't have any numbers as board members here to really take a look at this and what this report that you've given us. So that was one that I felt needs to be addressed. And as far as the report itself, I would like to speak about page 3 at the top, but I don't want, I don't feel that I need to have what you've written changed, but I just want to address it before we take action on it. So those were the things I saw that needed to, that I was hoping could be changed, those two little things. And for the public, I just went back to take a look at the net deficit position. I went back quite a ways as far as what our, right now it looks as if we have a net deficit of $1,600,000 for the fiscal year ending 13-14. And according to Smith and Newell back in 2010-11, we were at $2,183,000. So again, because our multiplier is going down, the amount of our liability is also going down. So it is moving in the right direction, even though it seems as if it's a very high number. So I just wanted to address that. Those are the things I said, other than the one issue that shouldn't be part of this report, but I do want to address it as it's on the agenda after everybody else talks about the report.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Wilson. Other commissioners, do you have any comment on the fiscal year 13-14 audit of the Solid Waste Management Authority by Smith and Newell?
I'd just like to say I appreciate the detailed response regarding insurance, the landfill insurance.
Thank you.
Because that's something that keeps coming up. And I admit, I was one of those that was thinking that was a necessity and we should do what it took to get insurance. But once I learned that the coverages really weren't there, it didn't make a lot of sense. So hopefully we won't see that on the 2015.
plus
Well,
the
that's
fact,
one of the things that's noteworthy about these, is that we do see the regular comments coming back and again. So for instance, one of the things was the net deficit position, and it's exactly like Commissioner Wilson states, which is, it is the liability associated with the landfill that creates a net deficit position, and we pay down that liability and we reduce that liability in the way it's calculated, and that reduces our net deficit position. But I have to take exception to Smith and Newell's assertion that the way to address this is to raise rates. We're reducing the liabilities, and even were we to raise rates, that wouldn't eliminate our net deficit position, because we wouldn't be able to raise rates in a way that would actually totally fund the landfill liability. So
You made that clear.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ted, there has never been any claim on any kind of a landfill abrogation, a break, that can be documented that insurance took care of. I mean, we're talking
we
about
found
anywhere
one.
from $5 to $10 million liability issue.
I found one, but I have to say I found it very strange, because it appeared to me that the thing that they paid that claim for was not covered under the policy that they had. So
Yeah, I thought insurance was going to be the answer. It clearly is, it's a non-issue. and one in which insurance probably would not be the answer because of its prohibitive cost, high deductibles, and then what have you got? Oh yeah, there's a fine print, we don't cover this on a Tuesday afternoon in May or something. And I don't mean to be facetious when I'm saying that, but I think ultimately the responsibility is going to come elsewhere if we have this kind of issue. So the best kind of preparation we can do is exactly what we're doing. Make sure that if something happens, it goes the ocean way rather than any other way.
One other comment that they've made, and again, this is a repeated comment, but they expressed concerns about fiscal controls of the activities at the Gasky and the Klamath transfer stations. These facilities have no power, scales, water, sewer, or even reliable cell phone coverage. And so while we continue to look at ways that we might be able to control those expenses and make sure that we are being fiscally responsible, at this time there's little evidence indicating that additional policies or procedures have much potential to result in a net increase in revenue from these facilities.
Okay, any additional commissioner comments on 5.2?
Well, just overall, if you really were to look at the Smith and Newell report over the course of the years, they keep bringing up the same things over and over again. So for the public to take a look at this, just as Mr. Ward said, they keep bringing up the significant deficiency. Of course, we have the liability at our landfill. They keep bringing up the Gasky and Klamath stations, which again, we do have policy and procedure in place that is very important, that the staff has something, they're not just told what to do, but they have a policy to follow. And then it is, they have to guess on the poundage, and then they do have a secondary employee double check. And really for the amount.
It's by the cubic yard in Gasky and Klamath.
They have a weight?
It's by the cubic yard, it's measured, and those measurements are written on each receipt. It's either done by can or by measurement. There are no
Volume, not
scales,
weight.
so there's no weight.
Right, so, but in double checking, I would assume that it gets weighed when it comes in across the,
There isn't a double checking that way. No.
oh, it doesn't get double
No,
checked that way?
Not in that way. There's a number of reasons for that, but there's not always not all garbage is the same density.
Right.
And so you can measure volume, even if you were to do averages, your volume, then projecting the weight and then double checking that doesn't really tell you much. If that makes any sense.
I thought that was something to double check. But anyway, the other thing that happens is that this particular, really, if you go back and you look at the way Smith and Newell has done these numbers, it shows that there's a loss of $240,000 a year because they just look at operating income and expense. But what they do not include in there is the franchise fees. They figure that the way the business is set up, if the JPA weren't there, the franchise fees would still come in. So those don't go into their numbers. Yeah, so that's a little bit confusing. And then the other thing is the depreciation. Is changed over these past few years. That was something that they had asked to have the depreciation put in, and we have changed that about two years ago to start building up the depreciation. So that has been done for the public to know. And then there was one more, let's see, so it was a franchise fee, the depreciation, oh yes, and the $198,000. So again, this board and the county auditors had a hand in it, took the monies for the final payment and split that out of our cash and put that on a line. And so that was a corrected action that the Smith and Newell wanted to have done. So all in all, even though it seems as if we keep getting dinged for the same things, the deficit is going in the right way. And I think that we are, the multiplier is going down, and I'm not really happy with the way that we do our unfunded liabilities. But all in all, I think we've got procedures and policy in place for the other things. There was one thing on here I just saw here that should be mentioned, and that's on page 3. It talks about a material misstatements that required says The report noted that financial statements provided by the Del Norte County auditors contained material misstatements that required adjustment, including post-closure liability, net OPEB, again, those are the unfunded liabilities, and the sublease payable at the transfer station. So we can't see those. We need to see those figures. That was a little bit, the material misstatement is at a higher level than it's kind of a little bit more serious. But anyway, all in all, I think it's moving in the right direction, just so the public knows that we are addressing these things. And some of the things that they bring up are specific to this type of a business that has this liability hanging over our head.
Okay, additional comments from commissioners on the Smith and Newell report?
Just very quickly, the $190,000 that happened and was transferred to the county, does that happen again, or is that done once?
No, it's done once, and you'll see it on every monthly statement that we have, including this one.
So our position's going to be improved by $190,000 next year?
No,
No?
that's the final payment that's set aside.
Right.
Okay.
Prior to this time, it was essentially cash on hand. Now it's set aside as final payment,
Right.
in addition to the cash on hand.
I'll open it up to the public now for any comments on the auditor's report. Seeing none, we'll move on. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt the audit and file. Is that what the...
No, adopt and submit the correction and action plan.
So the, I'm sorry. Discussion, possible action regarding, so what would be the,
I'll make a motion
To-
that we submit this corrective action plan to Smith
Okay.
and Newell.
thank you. All right, so,
And
I'll second that motion.
all right, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any additional board comments?
I don't know if this is the time to bring this up, but basically in your comments that you put forward, it talks about the,
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I'll do it again though.
it talks about the, let me see how you worded this here now, I've got too many papers going. The staffing. Okay, right in front of me. It talks about the staffing, and I wanted to bring this up to the board in regards to directing staff to maybe put on the agenda a letter to the county CAO, Jay Serena, and the Human Resources staff, Joe Young, regarding the impacts of loss of mid-management position that's directly responsible for financially reporting of the JPA is detailed in this report that Ted put forward and is indicated by Smith and Newell in their audit. And due to this position it's a critical position, the administrative assistant, and it's been being unfilled for a significant amount of time. And at this point in time, I don't know of a plan to refill it. And I feel that this position is for a JPA. It's not confined by the Del Norte County employee agreements, and it's getting hung up in there for an awful long time. Our attorney has indicated that mid-management positions for the JPA are not due the same considerations. I have pulled some MOUs and some of the information from the prior director in regards to the conditional employee, but I think that we've had problems with our monies and the fact that the JPA has been hammered time and time again for not having adequate staffing. We don't want to continue these delays, and as a board, this board, I think we're responsible for dealing with this issue, and that we need to make sure that we have qualified personnel that are handling the finances and the jobs getting done. So I feel that we need to write a letter to Jay, and Serena, I guess, is in charge of human resources.
Commissioner Wilson, I really appreciate what you're saying, but I think I have relevant information in my director's report that before the board takes action on this, I think that would be important
Well,
for them.
you know what, I'd like to hear that relevant information, because I hear that there is a delay, there's something going on, and at the same time, I don't want to close 5.2, and then you have go into your director's report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold 5.2 open. So after we hear your director's report, we can go back and entertain a possible letter. I think that would be the prudent thing to do.
All right.
Okay.
Now, I've asked the public for input on the auditor's report. I know I said that before. I'm reminded that I possibly did not say it, but I think I said, does the public wish to weigh in on 5.2 in any direct form? So I don't see anybody coming up to the microphone. I want to underscore that. So we're going to hold 5.2 open just for a minute until we hear your director's report. And at the end of 6.5, we'll quickly revisit 5.2, Commissioner Wilson, to see if a letter is in order based on what Ted Ward will deliver in his director's report. So I will move on to 5.3, and discussion and possible action regarding notices soliciting applications for the authority's public commissioner position. Ted?
Yeah. So staff recommendation is that the board directs staff to publish public notices in the Del Norte triplicate, that the authority will be accepting applications for the appointment as accepting applications for appointment as public member to the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, and that applications will be due no later than 5 p.m. February 27th, 2015, and the board will consider such applications at the authority meeting scheduled for March 11th, 2015.
Okay, that's clear. Public, wish to weigh in on this? Nobody wishes to say anything? Board commissioners, do we have any comments on this at this point? Then at this point, we will, the action is we will wait for that to happen at the deadline.
Do you need a motion?
You need a motion?
Need direction.
Okay,
I'll move that staff provide notices soliciting applications for the authority's public commissioner position as indicated.
second? Second. Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. And then any further board discussion on this? Having hearing that, Karen, would you poll the vote, please? Yes.
Yes?
Yes?
Yes. Okay, so let's go now to the director's report, and if you would, 6.1.
Yeah.
Let's go to that. And I don't see Mr. Taylor here today, so I was going to have you just go right through these things one after another, but I think at the end of 6.1, if there's exigent information in there relative to
Right.
5.2, then we'll stop that at this
Absolutely.
point, and I'll refer back to Commissioner Wilson. Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, so assuming you've read most of this, I'll just highlight some of the things. So during the last month, I did complete an inspection and sampling of stormwater at the landfill and quarterly gas monitoring, as well as diagnosed a problem and ordered a replacement power transformer for a digital port connecting the scales to the computer at the transfer station. This part failure, as no parts were available in the region, resulted in gate staff having to hand in their weights for over 2 days. The news that I wanted to share with you is that it appears the ongoing issue we had with our former administrative assistant has been resolved, and our employment with the agency is now complete. And so what I intended to do, but certainly am subject to board direction, was the critical position that's open at this point is the account clerk position, because Lisa Babcock has been acting as administrative assistant. She has been the account clerk, but she's trying to split those duties, and it's been challenging. So what I would like to do is work with the county personnel department and begin recruiting an account clerk in this coming month, because I totally concur with what Ms. Wilson was saying, and that this has been a hole that we really need to fill. And so now that that outstanding staffing issue is much more resolved than it has been in the last year and a half, I'd like to hire an account clerk.
Okay. Anything else in your acting director's report at this point?
That'll do for now.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to 5.2, and Commissioner Wilson, do you still want to introduce a motion to write a letter to our county administrative officer with regard to the board's concern, the authority's concern that certain positions have not been filled in the time?
No, it seems to have cleared itself up, so
Okay.
it took them an awful long time. Again, I think it was completely out of line, honestly. However, as far as the position, the administrative assistant position, I do feel that it would be prudent to fly that position with finding out, and Ms. Babcock, who I think seems to be doing a good job, can certainly apply for it, but as far as what the qualifications would be as far as accounting or, you know, like I said, I certainly have someone who works for me who's been trained in bookkeeping and can, you know, it's so easy for her to do things, you know, because of her training. And so, again, that's what I would suggest, is that I think it's a very important position, and I think that we need to have someone that has some expertise in the field and that can help us to resolve some of these issues. So I believe that we should, again, allow Ms. Babcock to apply, but to put the position out for administrative assistant.
Okay.
That requires
All right, so let's review. We're going back to 5.2. Thank you very much, Commissioner Wilson, for that input, and Ms. Babcock has every right to fill in that position, apply for that, as we are going to fly this. So we do have a motion on 5.2, and we do have a second. We've had public input on this, so at this time, yes, Bill, did you want to readdress on 5.2? Yes. Please approach.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Bill Lonsdale, I live in Crescent City. I just want to make sure that we're following the process that you have in place for staffing the agency, but also that we're not doing a by name thing here that might run afoul of personnel procedures. Thank you.
Let me defer your question to our counsel. Is there, were you dotting the i's and crossing the t's?
I'm not sure what the question is for me.
Well, you're concerned, are you concerned that we're violating personnel?
The question is making sure that we're not.
Okay. Following the appropriate protocol,
Yes, sir.
without mentioning of names or things like that. Is that what I'm hearing? Anything having to do with personnel and names is usually a closed session item. I don't see it as being an abrogation here, however.
No. There's no rule against, you know, the names of our employees are public.
Okay.
Ms. Babcock's name was mentioned, also mentioned in the staff report. But we don't, you know, it's best to stay away from naming people. We have an open position, and that's the one that, as suggested by
So we're
Mr.
within the
Ward.
parameters of discussing this in a proper way, rather than it go into a closed session. That's what I'm hearing.
Are we dealing with the audit right now?
Well, yeah. I'm sorry, issues are getting a bit murky here.
let's finish 5.2.
So I think that was 5.2. Let's finish 5.2. Motion and a second. Let's poll the vote.
Just so we're clear, this is a motion to adopt the audit report and submit it, the corrective action plan.
That's correct.
Just to approve and submit the corrective action plan. The final audit report will come at the next meeting. But as was pointed out, that audit report was not included in this agenda, and so there hasn't been anything for you to review and approve at this point.
So, Commissioner Wilson,
Yes?
Commissioner Hawley,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
and Chairman Gitlin.
Yes. All right. Now, I appreciate the issues were getting a bit murky and twisted in here. And I'm hearing clarity from our counsel that we're not abrogating or not violating anybody's rights by mentioning their name in a position which they may or may not hold.
And I have to say that I'm just a little confused because the account clerk position at this point is an open position, meaning there isn't anybody who's there to fill that position except for Lisa Babcock, who has been acting as administrative assistant. So the administrative assistant position at this point isn't an open position. We have a person doing that job. The open position we have is the account clerk. And what I was suggesting is this is an approved position within the staffing plan. It's an open position. I'd like to fill it. Any other action about, say, recruiting for the administrative assistant, if the board chooses to take that action, it seems to me that it would be appropriate to have that agendized at the next meeting.
I think that's prudent. That makes sense.
I think maybe more than that, take a look at the whole organizational structure. It's not a large organization, but we can kind of see how it all fits together. I know we've visited this in the recent past, but it wouldn't hurt to have that as a part of the item.
Excellent suggestion.
Okay, so Mr. Lonsdale, you have clarity on that, and I think it's important that these issues tend to get with people shorted, you're short on hand. People tend to do different jobs, not the one they've been hired for, but they're just picking up the slack. So we have to fill these positions as per our mission, and we have to do it in a forthright manner, which apparently there's been some foot dragging. It's for whatever reason at the higher levels of our county management. Now that's been addressed, and we'll see some action.
And I have to say that I do not interpret it as foot dragging. It was a complicated personnel issue, and I certainly appreciate the support from the county personnel department.
Foot dragging is the wrong word. I'm using it. It's putting a burden on you and your staff by the lack of hiring additional personnel, which makes your life and everybody's life at the solid waste more complicated, because they're doing more than one job and they're covering for this and they're covering for that, when in reality, I appreciate the fact we all have challenges, but you are the folks who are living it day by day. We go home and I don't know what your issues are until you let us know. So hopefully we'll have some clarity on this as we move forward. All right, now 6.2, just run through these.
I will try to be very brief in the next few.
Then we'll wrap
Is that
things
right?
up.
So generally, the treasurer controller report in the bank at the end of November, we had $594,985.19 in the bank. In addition, we had the $198,000 set aside as the last payment for the iBank loan. During that month end of November, we received in revenue $13,066 above expenses. Claims approved to director are fairly standard. One thing that might be noteworthy is we had a $924 expense for office supplies. That did include 2 signature pads and a printer used at the transfer station gate, so that's why that number was fairly large.
Didn't we buy those just recently?
We did, that's why they're appearing on this one. I may have announced it prior to it showing up on the claims approved by director.
Gosh, it was several months ago, 'cause I know I brought that up because I know yours are a little bit more expensive because they're weatherproof. Oh, what kind of life do you get out of those?
What?
What kind of life are you getting out of those?
It's really the cord that's wearing, and so we've found that it's worthwhile getting the guarantee on them because they come with a 1-year guarantee, and pretty much we get a 3-year guarantee, and they're lasting about 2.5 years currently.
Oh, that's pretty fast.
Yeah, it's handing them back and forth.
For as expensive as they are, they should last a lot more than that.
And then finally, looking at authority revenue, you'll notice that on the authority service fees, this is where I'm demonstrating that in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, we're $22,900 ahead of budget on authority service fees, so that's what allowed us to allocate additional funds into the budget. And we are a little behind on franchise fees, about $4,000 behind.
For what period of time?
First 6 months of the fiscal year, July through December 2014.
Right, and we
Yep.
had, originally when we did the budget, we assumed that there was going to be $26,000 less in it for Hambros, so we reduced the budget, and now we're up 21,000, so we'll still be over that. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be over that 26,000, which will be slightly over what we did last year. So, because we did reduce that budget by $26,000.
I would like to discuss the aging sheet. We do this periodically. I'm particularly interested in numbers that have at least 3 figures in them. And over 90 days, I see the U.S. Forest Service, $569. Redwood National Park, $1,500. Porter's Trucking and Logging, 17, almost 1,800.
Yeah, that was referred to collections. Several of these have been referred to collections. The national park agencies, generally, these are older accounts, and we're chasing the paperwork because essentially it appears that the county receives a variety of funds from the parks, and if it isn't absolutely clear what those are to go to, they go to the general fund. So we're wading through the historic paperwork to try to determine exactly which belongs to the authority and account accordingly.
Okay, I see Bowling Construction and
Also referred to
428, and I also see All About Town Home Repair, 264. Any of these ones that are 90 plus and there's several $100s in there, I mean, I'm adding this up, this is probably close to $4,000, maybe
It's
$4,500.
Yep.
$47.90.
Yeah, so I'm just,
But
so
a
it's
lot
out there.
Forest Service.
So you were,
But they've been referred to several of those have been referred to collections.
okay.
What do you do, Ted? Over how much amount do you go to collections?
It depends on their payment history, but certainly it's a case-by-case approval.
$250?
Yeah, and how long it's been and what the relationship is.
Do we have a policy on that?
There is, I'd be happy to bring that back, but it's not in front of me, so I couldn't quote you on it.
Yeah, something maybe over 250 or something, you know, after a while, it's not worth your time really on some of these. Huh?
Well, I think if
I don't
you,
think it's bad.
the pennies add up, and I would say that if this is a matter of collections and we're doing this in a forthright manner, anything after 90 should go to, especially in the small amounts, it should go to collections.
Absolutely, and I should inform the board that we are updating, just as we discussed last meeting, we're updating our forms so that we are looking to have all of our charge account customers essentially acknowledge that we can charge late fees, and then hopefully by imposing late fees, these outstanding balances over 90 days will largely evaporate.
All right, that concludes your director and treasurer's reports at
Yes, it
this
does,
time,
sir.
6.5. So I think we're at the point of adjournment, so we'll adjourn to our next meeting, which will be, is it 3:30 or is it 4 o'clock, Ted?
It's 4 o'clock if there is no closed session. If there is a closed session, the tradition would be that it would be 3:30.
Okay, so we'll leave that option if there is a closed session, 3:30 on February 14th at the Board of Supervisors chambers right here. And on that note,
Excuse me,
was there a
Chairman.
comment?
February 14th is a Saturday. Just
Oh.
pointed out.
11.
I'm sorry about
So
that.
are
Okay.
we talking the 10th or the 11th?
We're talking about the Wednesday, the second
11th.
Wednesday.
February 11th.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's make the correction right now. Thank you for
Sorry.
bringing that to our attention, Karen. So we are meeting, if there is closed session, 3:30. If it's a regular session, it'll be 4 o'clock on Wednesday, February 11th. Okay, on that note, we're adjourned.
Oh, did we get a receipt that they got our 5-year review in?
Yes, that was sandwiched in the text of the director's report, but yes, I've sent it, they received it, it got in on time,
They sent
thanks
it
to the
me.
task force.
Perfect.